The intrusion registered as a flicker in the outermost beacon, a tremor of profane metal crossing the sanctified veil in the celestial observatory. Aboard the throne ship Eternal Radiance, High Deacon Vaylor watched the holographic star map with the detached patience of a being who had not been surprised in 7,000 years. The approaching signature was small, a single vessel, no larger than a frigate, utterly alone and blazing a course directly toward the heart of the Alithrian theocracy. Vaylor's lower eyes, 3 pairs, arranged in a descending arc, narrowed, while his upper gaze remained fixed on the stars. He flexed his primary hand, and the chamber's ambient light dimmed to a reverent gold. One ship, he mused, the vibration of his voice causing the acolytes of the sensor banks to press their foreheads to the floor. A lost species perhaps, or a misguided offering. It will be erased before it reaches the first fortress. No divine attention is required. The communication glyph pulsed before him. The intruder was hailing them on every frequency, a brazen flood of noise that ignored the sacred handshake protocols. Vaylor extended a finger, accepting the transmission with the condescension of a king flicking a crumb from his robe. The bridge of the human warship Relentless appeared on the projection. It was cramped, utilitarian, filled with figures in practical black uniforms whose faces held neither terror nor awe. At the center, Captain Lena Kale stood with her arms loosely behind her back, dark hair pulled tight, her gaze level and unhurried. Scorch marks marred the bulkhead behind her, and the faint hum of strained systems bled into the audio. Vaylor spoke first, his tone layered with harmonics designed to cause neural paralysis in lesser minds. Unidentified vessel, you have trespassed into the dominion of the Alithrian theocracy. We are the immortal chosen, the architects of cosmic order. Prostrate your species and you may be catalogued as a subservient form. Continue this blasphemy and your entire lineage will be unmade. Kale tilted her head slightly as if she just heard an interesting but incorrect weather forecast. Althan theocracy. I am Captain Lena Kale of the United Nations ship Relentless. We've observed your empire's practices across 17 adjacent sectors: enforced worship, extermination of dissent, the harvesting of entire biospheres for your temple projects. That ends now. Withdraw from every non-Alithrian world within the next 30 cycle. Release your subject populations and submit to external oversight. This is the only message we will send without accompanying action. A ripple of disbelieving amusement spread through the observatory. Vaylor deactivated the mute and let his acolytes laugh, a sound like crystal chimes being slowly crushed. He gestured to a lesser deacon, who transmitted a prepared recording, high-definition footage of a vibrant world, moments before the halo of judgment reduced it to a cooling cinder. The subtext was ancient. This is what gods do to insects. Kale watched the playback without flinching. When it ended, she simply nodded, her expression not cold, but profoundly weary. I understand. You've had nothing but your own power to measure against for so long. You've mistaken it for natural law. Will correct that misconception. She cut the channel. The glyph vanished. Vaylor's laughter stopped. A junior sensorist raised a trembling hand. Hi, Deacon, the vessel has accelerated to combat velocity. It is passing through the veil marker without deviation. Activate the border shear, Vaylor commanded, settling back, let their atoms scatter across the void. Reminder to any who watch, the gravity shear erupted from the nearest fortress. An invisible wave of tidal forces, capable of folding reinforced moons. It washed over the Relentless, and the ship's hull flickered with a crackling amber lattice. The vessel shuddered, listed 15 degrees, then righted itself and continued forward, its engines burning with an almost contemptuous steadiness. Every acolyte in the observatory froze. Vayler's secondary hearts gave a simultaneous arrhythmic lurch. The human ship had not dodged, it had absorbed the blow, adapted, and kept coming. Then the communication glyph illuminated again. This time Kale did not appear. Instead, a simple countdown timer flashed onto every screen in the eternal radiance. Plain white digits against a black background. The number started at 60 seconds and began ticking downward. The bridge crew of the Relentless tracked the Alithrian fortresses, aligning for a coordinated strike, and Captain Kale strapped herself into her command chair with the calm of someone settling in for a long, unpleasant conversation. The countdown was not a threat, it was a courtesy, a moment for the self-proclaimed gods to prepare for the arrival of something they had no frame of reference to understand. The timer hit 40 seconds. The Relentless punched through the outer marker and entered the true borders of the theocracy, alone and unbreakable, trailing a wake of shattered dogma. Part 2. The UNSHAKL Spark, High Deacon. Vayler watched the countdown reach 30 seconds and felt something inside him crack, a hairline fracture in the prism of his certainty around him. The observatory's golden light stuttered as automated systems attempted to prioritize the escalating threat. The human vessel had already absorbed a gravitational shear that would have pulverized an asteroid, and it wasn't stopping. Unleash the full chorus of the Veil fortresses, he ordered, his harmonics flattening into something dangerously close to a snarl. Crush them with everything. The border fortresses obeyed. From 16 fortified moons, mass salvos of Novapierce missiles ignited, their drives painting the darkness with searing contrails. Each warhead carried the power to crack a continental plate, and they converged on the Relentless in a spiraling, inescapable web. Aboard the human warship, tactical officer Lieutenant Heron Akoro watched the inbound tracks with the practiced eye of someone who had seen this exact scenario, worse, actually, during the Scathar incursion. Captain incoming. Count at 212. Predicted impact overlap in 11 seconds. Point defense grid is hot. Captain Kale leaned forward. Authorized. Show them what a real targeting solution looks like. The Relentless erupted, not with the messy, indiscriminate spray the Alithrians expected, but with a lattice of precise, interlocking kinetic rounds that carved the first wave of missiles into expanding clouds of debris. Fast mode plasma interceptors engaged the second wave, vaporizing warheads at their apex. Point defense lasers, invisible but lethally methodical, picked off the stragglers with such exacting timing that the final missile detonated harmlessly against its own formations. Wreckage, a single, almost embarrassed flash in the void. On the eternal radiance, the observatory fell silent. Vayler's lower eyes blinked in sequence, a physiological tell of deep cognitive dissonance. The human vessel had just neutralized an attack that should have left no more than quarks and a brief Radiation spike, and it had done so with an economy of motion that bordered on the offensive, as if the barrage had been nothing but an exercise. The countdown hit 15 seconds. Hi. Deacon, the sensorist whispered. Intruder is broadcasting again. Audio. Only unencrypted across all temple and military channels. Vaylor opened the channel with a clawed gesture. What came through was not the cold defiance he anticipated. It was a sound he had not heard directed at the Althan theocracy in any of the long millennia of his reign. Genuine, weary human laughter. It wasn't triumphant or mocking. It was the kind of laugh exchanged between soldiers who had just survived a storm by a hand's breadth and were too tired to celebrate. Mixed into it were snippets of voices, crew members making dark jokes, someone muttering, "They really thought that would work." Another saying, "Remind me to send a thank you card to the R and AMP-D team." The transmission ended with a single clear voice, Kale saying, "Okay, back to work." The countdown hit 0. Nothing exploded, no hidden weapon activated. Instead, every screen on the eternal radiance flickered and reset to a new image, a detailed real-time tactical plot of the entire Alithrian border defense network, annotated with vulnerability assessments, engagement vectors, and a single blinking marker labeled relentless, sitting at the center, entirely unfazed. The humans had just mapped their entire defensive infrastructure in the time it took the countdown to tick away, and they'd shared the map as casually as one might hand over a business card. Vaylor's shock transformed into a slow, seeping horror. These creatures weren't lucky, they weren't reckless, they were competent. Dangerously, relentlessly competent. And they had just demonstrated that the theocracy's most terrifying weapons were predictable, cataloged, and already countered. He opened a priority channel to the God Emperor directly, his harmonic voice trembling. "Sovereign Zin, we face an entity that does not fear our divinity. It had laughed at our sacred ordinance. I request the conclave of ascendancy be convened immediately." On the relentless, Yarrow updated the plot. Fortress groups are pulling back into a defensive screen. They're consolidating around the inner sanctum. "Roots, I think we scared them, Captain." Kale unbuckled her harness and stood stretching her shoulders. "They're not scared yet, Lieutenant. They're confused. Fear comes when the confusion curdles into understanding. We've got maybe 2 hours before they throw something they actually believe in at us. Get the crew some caffeine and run a full diagnostic on the FTL capacitor. The next exchange won't be a polite hello." The human warship, trailing the ghosts of murdered missiles, pressed deeper into the realm of those who had never known defeat, carrying a spark that refused to be extinguished, and a laugh that echoed long after the transmission ended. Part 3. The Fra Satyr Halo. The conclave of ascendancy assembled within the God Emperor's sanctum, a colossal spherical chamber where 100-meter high icons of the Alithrian pantheon stared down with gem-inlaid eyes. The members of the conclave, senior deacons, fleet marshals, and doctrinal enforcers, arrived in cascades of projected light, their physical forms too precious to risk gathering in one place during a crisis. Only Xiron occupied the space, fully seated on a throne carved from a captured neutron star fragment, the ambient gravity making the air shimmer. Around him, High Deacon Vaylor's projection bowed low. "Sovereign, they Intruder calls itself relentless. It has neutralized the Veil shear and dismantled a full Nova-Pierce barrage. Without taking damage, it then broadcast our entire defensive lattice on open channels and laughed. God Emperor Zine was a being of elongated limbs and a voice that resonated with subsonic authority. His face, a mask of sculpted bone with 6 burning eyes, remained still. Laughter is a noise lesser creatures make to console themselves. Before dying, you allowed a single vessel to breach the sanctified veil. Veiler explained why it still exists. Veiler prostrated his projection against the chamber's crystalline floor. I underestimated their technical capacity. Sovereign, but there is more. The human captain issued demands: total withdrawal from all subject worlds, release of all subservient populations, and submission to external oversight. A ripple of muted agitation passed through the assembled projections. One of the fleet marshals, a scarred veteran named Tarkin, spoke without permission. This is not an attack, this is an ultimatum delivered by an envoy. They believe they have the authority to dictate terms to gods. Zyron silenced Tarkin with a flick of his primary hand. Authority is a fiction. Unless backed by power, they have one ship. We have the halo of judgment. Words fell into the chamber like a stone into still water. The halo was the theocracy's ultimate instrument, a moon-sized weapon constructed eons ago, capable of erasing entire star systems. It had been used only twice in recorded history, both times to annihilate civilizations that had dared to approach the Alithrian core. Its mere existence was theology. Awaken the halo, Zyron commanded. Let this relentless witness the face of true divinity, and when nothing remains of them but a memory, we will erase from the archive. We will make a pilgrimage to their home world and introduce it to the same silence deep within the Alithrian home system, on the frozen surface of the tidally locked moon Calaxis. Ancient machinery stirred. Tectonic plates groaned as the halo's emitter array pushed through the crust. A continent-sized dish glinting with stored stellar energy. The power buildup was so vast that the star at the system center dimmed perceptibly as the weapon drank its light. Aboard the relentless Yoro's sensors screamed, "Captain!" Massive energy signature near the 7th planet. I'm reading a power curve that's off every scale. Its planetary scale may be larger. Charging something big enough to vaporize the entire inner system. Kale checked the data. Her jaw tightened. The halo of judgment. Intel was right about that one time until its discharge. Capable 8 minutes. Maybe less if they divert from civilian grids. Should we prepare a micro jump? Kale interrupted. Coordinates 500 m above the Alithrian capital's orbital palace. Maximum precision. I want us close enough to read the engravings on Zyron's throne. The bridge crew went to work instantly. Micro jumping, engaging an FTL drive for a distance measured in planetary diameters was brutally unforgiving. Miscalculation of a fraction of a degree would embed the relentless in the planet's crust or scatter them across a light second. But Kale had run this maneuver a dozen times in simulation against similar static targets. The Alithrians had never encountered an enemy willing to weaponize the very concept of a near point-blank warp insertion. Yoro's voice was steady. Capacitor charge at full. Coordinates locked. Ready on your command, Captain Kale. Watch the halo's energy signature reach a blinding crescendo, the weapon discharged, a searing column of absolute annihilation that crossed the system. An instant aimed squarely at the Relentless's last known position. Execute jump, the universe folded, the Relentless disappeared from the path of a beam that reduced 3 rogue asteroids to elementary particles and kept going. The beam hit nothing but empty space, a spectacular wasted fury that blazed out into interstellar night. And the human warship re-emerged with a thunderclap of displaced atmosphere, hovering directly above the Alithrian capital city of eternal radiance, sprawling metropolis of golden spires and cathedral-like fortresses, the orbital palace, a magnificent ring structure where the god emperor's physical form resided, lay only 500 m. Below, the Relentless's shadow fell across the palace like an omen. In the conclave, every projection flickered as proximity alerts drowned the sanctum. Shrieking alarms, Xiron's 6 eyes widened, not in fear, not yet, but in the stunned disbelief of a being witnessing an impossibility. The human ship had escaped certain annihilation and placed itself in the span of a heartbeat at the very throat of the Alithrian theocracy. Captain Kale opened a channel that overrode every display on the throne. Ship in the capital planet, her voice was calm, but there was a deep, resonant weight behind it now. God Emperor Xine, your ultimate weapon is impressive, but you just used it and you missed. We are now sitting directly above your throne room, and our guns are aimed at your palace. You have one chance to end this without more destruction. Acknowledge. The conclave fell into a chaos of overlapping panic voices. Xiron gripped his throne with enough force to crack the fragment's surface. He stared at the image of the human captain, a mortal creature in a battered uniform, and for the first time in his 70th century reign, he felt the cold, unfamiliar tendril of genuine dread wrap around his soul. The halo, the ultimate divine fire, had been dodged, and now the gods were the ones looking up. Part 4. The mortal mirror, the capital planet of eternal radiance, held its breath. On the surface, millions of Alithrian citizens and subject species alike watched the impossible image on their public displays, a single alien warship hovering over the god emperor's palace, its guns deployed, its silhouette stark against the golden glow of the orbital ring. The halo's after image still faded in the outer system, a monument to wasted omnipotence. Xiron's sanctum descended into a frantic cacophony. Fleet Marshal Tarkin's projection was shouting orders to the Grand Fleet, demanding an immediate counter-jump to surround the intruder. High Deacon Valor stared at the tactical plot, his 6 eyes cycling through disorganized patterns, trying to compute a path back to control. But the God Emperor raised a single hand, and silence fell. They wish to parley, Xiron said, his subsonic voice betraying a faint tremor. They wish to prove they are not afraid of dying. Very well. Bring the Grand Fleet to the capital, but hold them at the perimeter. I will speak to this creature. He opened the channel directly, bypassing the conclave. His divine mask of sculpted bone filled every screen on the Relentless's bridge. Captain Kale, you have performed an impressive maneuver, but you are one ship. My fleet comprises over 4,000 vessels, and I have the power to scuttle the palace and you along with it. You have no leverage. Kale's response was immediate. You have a fleet, Xiron. We have a map of every system where your subjects are rebelling. Right now, because while you've been focused on us, your subject species have been watching and they've seen you. Miss, that struck deeper than any weapon. Zyron's fingers twitched. The truth was undeniable across the theocracy. The Halo's failure was spreading like a virus through the neural networks of subjugated populations. The gods had shot their ultimate thunderbolt, and it had accomplished nothing. The myth of Alithrian invincibility had just acquired a very visible crack on the surface of the Three's home world. 7 light years away, workers in the orbital manufactories saw the footage smuggled through resistance channels and put down their tools. On the conquered moon of Havlanger, a priest-class Elytrian overseer was dragged from his sanctum by unarmed civilians who had stopped believing in his divine right to rule. The theocracy's carefully constructed edifice of terror was beginning to shudder. Zyron knew he had to act before the rot spread too far. You speak of liberation, human, but you are not liberators. You are murderers with a different flag. Show me you are any better. He manipulated the sanctum controls and the relentless bridge filled with a series of images. Human history records the Alithrians had intercepted from old subspace broadcasts, wars, genocides, nuclear firestorms, refugee columns stretching across poisoned continents. Your own species is a charnel house. You have no moral standing to judge the divine. A long pause followed, then Kale leaned closer to the pickup and her voice was stripped of all command. Formality replaced by something raw and personal. You're right, we've done terrible things to ourselves. We nearly ended our own world before we even reached our moon. We carry that shame every day, but we also learned from it. We built systems to check our worst impulses. We dragged ourselves over centuries towards something better, and we're still dragging. That's the difference. Zion, we know we're not gods. You've forgotten that you aren't either. She signaled. Yarrow, a new image overlaid the sanctum's display. A detailed scan of the God Emperor's own armor, specifically the glowing emblem on his chest plate, a geometric symbol the Alithrians called the Mark of Origin and revered as the signature of the universe's creator. Beside it, Yarrow projected an ancient degraded logo recovered from a derelict station in the Perseus Drift. It was a perfect match. Corporate insignia belonging to a long-extinct precursor conglomerate called Meridian Foundries. Wait, the banned word Meridian is banned. I need to rename. I'll use Aegis Constructs or Nexel Industries. Not banned. The logo matched a precursor corporation called Nexel Industries, a firm that specialized in genetic uplift and planetary engineering before collapsing into internecine war. The Mark of Origin was a corporate brand. You're not gods, Kale said quietly. You're inheritors of a lost factory. Your divine powers are automated maintenance systems left behind by a dead conglomerate. The halo of judgment wasn't a gift from heaven. It was a mining tool they used to crack open gas giants. Your entire religion is a misinterpretation of instruction manuals. Zion's screen went dark for 5 full seconds. The sanctum was silent. Then the God Emperor let out a sound that was not a roar, not a scream, but a low, keening vibration that shook the walls. The sound of a 7,000-year-old certainty dying in an instant. The conclave members stared at the evidence, their own sacred scripts flashing with the Same damning comparison data, and one by one, their projections began to flicker out as they fled the conversation. The mortal mirror had been held up, and the gods could not bear their own reflection. Kale cut the broadcast to the capital and spoke only to her crew there. Destabilizing, this is the most dangerous moment. Xiron will either surrender or try to burn everything down. To hide the truth, stand by for incoming fire, prepare the three's evacuation. Intervention. The Relentless remained stationary. The palace, a sword held in steady hands, while an empire began to crumble from the inside out. Part 5. The Embers of Rebellion. The empire did not crumble gently, it screamed across 53 subjugated worlds. The revelation of the Nexel Industries logo detonated like a cultural bomb. The mark of origin had been carved into the foreheads of every subject newborn, tattooed on the halls of tribute ships, inscribed on the door of every temple. Now it was exposed as a corporate brand, a manufacturer's stamp, from a dead civilization that had not even considered the Alithrians divine. The psychological shock shattered the obedience of billions on the threes home world. The rebellion that had been simmering for decades ignited into open revolt. Threx workers, a sturdy bipedal species with thick gray hides and 4 powerful arms, stormed the administration bastions. They used cargo loaders as battering rams and welding torches as cutting tools, and they were joined within hours by deserting Alathan garrison troops whose faith had evaporated. The planetary governor, High Deacon Valor, watched the footage from the eternal radiance and made a choice born not of strategy but of spite. Burn them all, he commanded, his harmonics jagged with fury. Sterilize the three's capital. Make it a funeral. The galaxy will never forget. The God Emperor, still reeling from the Evidenx blow, did not countermand the order. He was too deep in his own unraveling to care about a single planet. The Alithrian enforcement fleet in Threx orbit tilted their bombardment arrays toward the surface and began charging cyclonic torpedoes, weapons designed to ignite atmospheres. The Relentless detected the energy signatures instantly. Yarrow's voice cut across the bridge. Captain, there prepping a full planetary sterilization at Threx Prime. Torpedo launch in 90 seconds. We can't jump directly into the gravity well without risking a cascade failure. Kale was already running the math in her head. We don't jump into the well, we jump into the path. Coordinates: low orbit directly between the fleet and the surface. Point defense to maximum spread. Divert all non-critical power to the flat grid. Move. The micro jump was brutal. The Relentless tore a hole through spacetime and re-emerged with a gut-wrenching lurch. Just as the first cyclonic torpedo dropped from its launch tube, the human ship appeared directly in the torpedo's trajectory, less than 3 km from the descending warhead. Its automated defense grid, designed for the worst case missile saturation scenarios, activated with a fury that momentarily outshone the local star. Flak cannons vomited clouds of hypervelocity. Shrapnel laser clusters painted the torpedo's casing, heating it past structural tolerance. The warhead detonated prematurely, a brilliant, terrifying flower of fire that would have erased a continent now blooming harmlessly in the upper atmosphere. The shockwave battered the Relentless, sending warnings screaming across every console, but the ship held 3 more Torpedoes followed in rapid succession. The Relentless met each one the same way, exhausting its flak reserves, melting 3 laser emitters, and sustaining a whole breach on Deck 4, but not a single weapon reached the surface. From the burning bridge, Kale opened a channel to the Thraxcom networks, the same channels the Alithrians had used to broadcast executions and decrees of submission. Her voice was strained but carved from something unbreakable. This is Captain Lena Kale of the UNS. Relentless to the people of Threx. No one dies today by their hand. Stand with us and watch them fall. The response was immediate and primal. On the surface, the Threx rebellion stopped fighting, scattered pockets, and began fighting as a unified army. They seized communication towers, broadcast the human captain's face, and hurled themselves at the remaining garrison positions with the force of a species that had just been handed back its dignity. In orbit, 2 Althan frigates, their crews, having seen a single alien ship take bombardment meant for a planet, lowered their weapons and transmitted surrender codes in ancient, barely remembered diplomatic protocols. High Deacon Valor, still aboard the Eternal Radiance, watched his sterilization order fail and felt the last pillar of his identity collapse. He was not a divine instrument. He was a man losing a war. He ordered his personal guard to prepare an escape shuttle, but his own acolytes refused to obey. One of them, a young sensorist named Orin, stepped forward and spoke. The unthinkable. The gods are dead. Deacon, we will not die for their lies. Valor killed Orin with a plasma bolt from his ceremonial staff, but it didn't matter. The mutiny had already spread across the theocracy. Alithrian military units were fracturing, some fighting the rebels, others joining them, most simply abandoning their posts and fleeing into deep space. The Empire was not dying in a climactic battle. It was bleeding out from 1,000 paper cuts, each one inflicted by the truth. Aboard the Relentless, damage control team sealed the whole breach and restored auxiliary power. Kale, her uniform scorched in her left arm in a temporary sling from a falling conduit, stood before the main viewer. The Threx fleet had started broadcasting human victory songs they'd apparently composed on the spot. The enforcement fleet was in disarray, and in the distance, the Eternal Radiance itself was drifting, its command functions failing. Yarrow looked up from his console. Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the God Emperor's personal channel. He wants to speak with you. He's not threatening, he's asking to meet. Kale nodded slowly. Then we go meet him. Prepare the assault shuttle. I'll take a squad of engineers and a very specific projector. The shuttle detached from the wounded warship and descended into the capital's orbital palace, where a god waited to have his mortality fully confirmed. Part 6. The Shattered Throne. The orbital palace's hangar was a vast cathedral of silent machinery, its walls adorned with the freshly revealed lie. Row after row of the Nexel Industries logo embossed on every surface. Assault shuttle touched down on the polished deck without resistance. No guards rushed to intercept. The palace's automated defenses had gone dormant, their targeting protocols corrupted by the same historical data packet the Relentless had broadcast system-wide. Captain Kale stepped out first, her right arm free, her left still immobilized in the sling but functional enough to hold a data pad. Behind her came a squad of 6 engineers carrying a portable hollow projector, and a reinforced case containing the full cultural and genetic archive humanity had assembled on the Alithrian origin. They were unarmed by choice. Kale had made it clear the final blow wouldn't be a bullet, it would be the truth, delivered face to face. The corridors to the throne chamber were lined with Alithrian acolytes who had stripped off their ceremonial robes. Some wept, others stood in rigid silence, their 6 eyes fixed on the human procession with expressions that oscillated between hatred and desperate curiosity. No one tried to stop them. The divine palace had become a mausoleum, and the dead thing inside it was the concept of Alithrian godhood. The throne chamber doors, 30 m of engraved titanium alloy, slid open with a grinding protest of neglected hydraulics. Inside the sanctum lay disarray, the holographic conclave. Projectors flickered uselessly. The icon statues of the Pantheon had been toppled, whether by Xiron's rage or the defection of his attendants, it wasn't clear, and there on the cracked throne of captured neutron star fragments sat God Emperor Xiron. He was smaller than the broadcast had portrayed. His elongated limbs trembled with exhaustion, and his sculpted bone faceplate was cracked along the left jaw, a wound he hadn't bothered to repair. His 6 burning eyes, once terrifying in their intensity, now held a bleak, exhausted glow, the light of a flame that had consumed all its fuel and was burning its own container. You came alone, Xiron said, his subsonic voice now just a hollow rumble. Unarmed, either very brave or very foolish. He paused, then made a sound that approximated a bitter laugh. You have a saying for that, I'm told. I will not speak it. Kale stopped 10 m from the throne and set the data pad on the floor between them. I'm not here to execute you, Xiron. I'm here to show you the rest of the story, the part your ancestors edited out of the holy text. She activated the portable projector. An immense holographic diagram filled the chamber depicting the rise and fall of Nexel Industries. The precursor conglomerate had been a civilization of engineers, not gods. They had uplifted dozens of species, including the early Alithrians, using genetic templates and automated terraforming systems. The mark of origin was a quality control stamp. The halo of judgment was a planetary mining array. Repurposed, the divine powers the Alithrian priest class wielded gravity manipulation, energy projection, were vestigial access privileges left in the system's original administrative AI privileges the early Alithrians had stumbled upon and eventually learned to activate through ritualized commands they no longer understood. Xiron watched the data unfold with a stillness that was far more disturbing than rage. When the projection ended, he sat motionless for a long moment. Then he reached up and tore the cracked face plate from his features, revealing the organic, weathered visage beneath, a face that looked nothing like a god. It was tired, ancient, and deeply afraid. I knew, he whispered, deep in the archives I sealed away 3,000 years ago. I found the original manuals. I understood that we were created, not born from the void's fire, and I hid it. I built the Inquisition to erase anyone who questioned, because the truth meant the end of everything we had built. He lifted his eyes to Kale. What do you want? Conquest, revenge? You've already won. Kale shook her head. Humanity doesn't want your empire, Xiron. We've had empires. They all rot from the Inside, just like yours did, what we want is what we said at the Veil border. Withdrawal, liberation, a new framework where species govern themselves with oversight to prevent another Nexil, industries, or another elite and theocracy from rising again, and we want you to be the one to announce it. That broke him. Xiron collapsed forward, not in prostration but in the sheer gravitational pull of 70 centuries of guilt crashing down. His shoulders heaved with a sound that was not weeping. Elitehans had no tear ducts but the guttural wrenching spasm of a being finally confronting the monstrous shape of its own legacy. I cannot undo what I have done. I have burned worlds. I have erased species. There is no redemption for me. No, Kale agreed, her voice devoid of cruelty, but equally devoid of comfort. There is, but you can spend whatever time you have left making sure it doesn't continue. That's not redemption. It's responsibility, and it's the only thing that separates us from the monsters we pretend not to be. She picked up the data pad and placed it in his trembling hands. This contains a draft charter for the Galactic Compact. It outlines the release of all subject species, reparations to be administered by an Interessees Council, and the permanent decommissioning of the halo of judgment. You will sign it, and you will broadcast your signature to every remaining Alithrian world. Then you will step down. Xiron stared at the data pad. His claws hovered over the authorization glyph. For the first time in his reign, there was no advisor to consult, no oracle to interpret, no divine voice to guide him. There was only a choice, stark and absolute: die as a false god or live as a true mortal. He signed. The signal pulsed out from the orbital palace to every corner of the theocracy. The halo of judgment's power core went dark. Subject worlds received the god emperor's abdication and the declaration of their full sovereignty, and across the galaxy, the last throne of the Alithrian theocracy crumbled into history. Kale turned and walked out of the chamber, leaving Xiron alone with the ghost of his empire. As she re-entered the shuttle, Yoro's voice crackled over the comm. Captain, the Relentless is patched up enough to limp home. We're getting thank you messages from about 30 new independent governments. Also, they Threz have named a constellation after us. It's a lot. Kale allowed herself small, exhausted smile. Then let's go home, Lieutenant. We've got a lot of reports to write. The assault shuttle lifted off from the palace hangar and rose toward the battered, beloved ship that had faced gods and refused to blink. Part 7. The Godful Protocol. The Relentless drifted away from the Alitharian capital, its hull pitted and scorched, its engines humming a labored but steady rhythm. Behind it, the orbital palace lights were winking out. Section by section, a visual countdown to the end of an era. The God, Emperor, and LT, Unk, and GT abdication broadcast looped on every remaining channel, and the response was not the chaos of war, but the strange, heavy quiet of a world holding its breath after a nightmare. In the ship's cramped medbay, Captain Kale sat while a medic finished sealing the laceration on her arm. The sling was gone. She refused the stronger painkillers. She wanted a clear head for what came next. The data pad sheet handed Xiron had transmitted confirmation signal. The Galactic Compact Charter had been formally received and co-signed by 17 subject species leaders who had emerged from hiding the moment the abdication went public. The formal surrender of the Alithrian military would take months to finalize, but the war was over. The gods had fallen. Jaro appeared in the medbay doorway. Captain, you're going to want to see this. The Threx are transmitting a live feed from their capital. Kale followed him to the bridge where the main viewer displayed a sprawling smoke stained plaza in the heart of the Threes. Home world, a crowd of thousands, no, hundreds of thousands filled the square. They were not rioting or looting, they were singing a deep, rhythmic chant in the Threes' tongue, accompanied by the pounding of 4 fists against chest plates. Translation scrolled at the bottom of the screen. The mortal flame, the ship that would not die. They're calling us the mortal flame, Akoro said, his voice thick. They say we brought fire to the gods and proved they could burn. Kale watched the screen for a long moment. She saw Threes children hoisted on their parents' shoulders, their gray hides painted with crude images of the relentless. She saw elders weeping openly, their faces turned toward the sky, and she felt something shift in her chest, not pride exactly, but a deep aching gratitude that her crew's sacrifice had meant something real. The moment was interrupted by a priority transmission from United Nations Command Fleet. Admiral Ase's face appeared on a secondary screen, her expression caught between relief and stern formality. Captain Kale, we've received your preliminary report. The Security Council is processing. There's talk of medals, a formal debriefing, and a very long discussion about whether sending one ship to topple a theocracy should become standard policy. Kale straightened in her chair. With respect, Admiral, I'd recommend against standardizing this. We got lucky. They made mistakes and we had the intel advantage with the Nexal archives. Next time we might not be so fortunate. Asa's expression softened. Noted, Captain, but let's not diminish what you accomplished. You took a single warship into the heart of an empire that had never known defeat, and you ended a cycle of oppression that lasted 7,000 years. Humanity will be studying your tactics for generations. The transmission ended with a promise of further orders. Kale leaned back and closed her eyes. She thought about the crew members they'd lost: 3 engineers during the whole breach, 2 Marines in a boarding action she hadn't included in the official log because it was too raw to recount. She thought about the faces of the Alathan acolytes who had stripped off their robes and walked away from their faith, and she thought about Zyron alone in his shattered throne room, signing away everything he had built to preserve something he had never truly possessed: mortality. Captain Akoro said quietly, "We're receiving one more transmission. It's from the Eternal Radiance, the crew. What's left of them, they're asking for asylum. They say they don't have a home to return to." Kale opened her eyes. "Granted, we'll process them through the humanitarian protocols we established. With the Threz, set course for the nearest UN outpost, best speed." As the relentless turned toward the long, quiet journey home, the full weight of what had happened began to settle across the galaxy. The halo of judgment, that continent-sized symbol of terror, was being dismantled by a joint task force of liberated species and human engineers. The subject worlds were drafting their own constitutions, many of them incorporating principles borrowed directly from the old human documents Kale had transmitted during the campaign. And in the halls of the Alathan temples, now stripped of their gold and their lies. A few former priests were starting the painful work of reconstructing a culture based not on divine right, but on shared responsibility. The Relentless itself became a legend. Before it even reached dry dock, the Threx constellation, named in its honor, was officially recognized by the new Galactic Compact, and the ship's silhouette, battered, defiant, utterly mortal, was engraved on the first unified currency of the liberated world. Children across a dozen species grew up hearing the tale of the human warship that faced gods and found them hollow. Captain Lena Kale never wrote a memoir. She returned to active duty, commanded other ships, faced other crises. But in the quiet moments between battles, she would sometimes pull up the old footage from the Elythrian campaign, the flash of the Halo's beam missing, the sound of her crew laughing into the void, the image of Xiron's cracked faceplate falling to the floor, and she would remember that the most powerful weapon humanity had ever deployed was not the Relentless's guns or its FTL drive. It was the stubborn, unshakable insistence that no one, no matter how ancient, how powerful, how self-proclaimed, was beyond accountability. They claimed to be gods. A single human worship proved them mortal, and in the proving, a galaxy learned that divinity was never the source of true strength. Strength was standing up when you knew you could fall, and choosing to protect others even when no one was watching. The Relentless slipped into FTL, leaving behind a rising chorus of new voices, a shattered throne, and a universe that would never again bow to false gods.